it's Becky and today we're doing a little bit of a late January wrap up. It's nearly the end of February already. I've just been putting off doing any filming, so I just haven't done this video yet. But we're going to go through all books I read last month. I actually had a really good reading month, so I'm not too bad about it. I am only going to go through the physical books just because it's already been so long that I can't fully remember what I've read on my Kindle, and I'm too lazy to leave the comfort of my electric blanket to check for you. So we're going to do physical books. Luckily I read a lot of physical books due to my New Year's resolution, so there's quite a few to go through. First up is one of the smallest books I've read, which was Applebow by Noel Streatfeild. This is one of my favourite authors from my childhood. I read all of the Shoes books that I could get my hands on, and Applebow is actually it's a different name. They used to call it Travelling Shoes, and it was one of the books that was actually out of print when I started collecting my copies. So it's one of the books I haven't read before, and I really enjoyed it. It was a little bit different to some of the other Shoes books, and I do say this kind of anecdotally because it's been a while since I've read any of the Shoes books. This book specifically is more about, instead of it being so focused on kind of the training and the arts aspects of it, it's way more about family and home. So Applebow is actually their childhood home for the 4 siblings, but when Sebastian, who is a violinist, becomes kind of a child prodigy and goes on tour, all of the family go with them and travel the world. But the siblings start to really want just to have a home base and to be at home for once with their family as well, because they realise that actually, whilst they're really happy for Sebastian and there's no tension between the siblings in the book, which is lovely to see, they all have talents and dreams and hopes too. So yeah, it was really great to read that. The siblings have great relationships throughout, and I really also enjoyed the family relationships for both sets of grandparents who helped advise and helped plan for the kids to kind of get their life that they want as well. And then one of the best things about this book is that the eldest sibling, Myra, who is also the sibling that we follow the most, I would say she's probably the central character who's kind of we follow along with. She doesn't actually have like a talent in the form of she's not a dancer or a musician or an artist or anything like that. Her talent comes in being kind of a sensible and a good sibling to her 3 siblings. And I feel like that's one of the best things, is like actually her grandfather was telling her, like, just because you don't have a dream or a talent that you want to go into as like a job doesn't mean that you don't have things that you deserve and want in life that you get to have, such as having a home, like Applebow, which is the home that she's always dreamed of going back to. So yeah, it was just a really good read, a really nice read, especially for kind of a cold, dreary January day. Next up I have Loner by Georgina Young, and I actually didn't like Loner. I did finish reading it, but I started reading it last year and I had to start rereading it this year from the beginning because I couldn't remember anything that happened. And one of the things about Loner is it's a coming of age story. It's a contemporary book set in Australia about Lona, who has dropped out of art school, doesn't really know what she's doing with her life, and is also a huge introvert. Like, she doesn't want to go out a lot, she doesn't have that many friends. She does have some friends, she does have some relationships in the book, but the majority of the story is very disjointed. It kind of skips. The book isn't split out by chapters, but like every few paragraphs it changes scene. And whilst this connects to the feeling of coming of age and it being disjointed and not quite syncing up, I feel like that was a conscious decision on the author's part, but a lot of the story wasn't very interesting. So I was often like switching off and tuning out to what I was reading. And not a lot happened in the book. I can't even tell you like what the plot was apart from coming of age. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend this book, but this is my contemporary read of the month, so yes. Next up, we're going back right to the beginning of the month, which is when I read I Tell You I Love You, But Then I Would Have to Kill You, by Ali Carter. I know this was a huge book years ago. The Gallagher Girls Spy Academy was a book that I know was talked about a lot by people, but I've had it on my shelf for quite a few years. I just never had read it, and now that I've got all my books in my house, I've been in my head, I'm like, I need to read more physical books. I need to read the books that I already own before I buy more, so that's why I picked up this one, and I was pleasantly surprised. It was a really fun read. I enjoyed the premise of a spy school. I was confused because obviously I could tell that there was school uniforms, and I expected it to be kind of a British spy school, a little bit like MI High, things like that, but it wasn't. It's an American spy school. The main thing is it is more of a contemporary book where the focus is on the romance, and this is well written. I feel like watching someone who's been trained to be a spy from a young age have to kind of go through boy trouble is very believable. And yeah, it was just a really fun read right at the beginning of the month. Would recommend it if you haven't already read this, especially because I think Ali Carter's coming up with some more adult books soon, or has recently. I'm not quite sure on that, I'd have to check. Next up is my classic of the month, which is The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. This is a really depressing book. Like, I'm depressed, and this made me feel more depressed. Like, and I'm sure it was a really great book at the time, especially like for anyone who was trying to put into words how they were feeling. But if you're feeling bad about yourself, I wouldn't recommend reading it. Other than that, it's a really great book. Like, it perfectly explains kind of how it feels being young, being depressed, not really know what you're doing with life. Do you think there's some areas out of its time, especially with how it talks about other people such as black people? I wouldn't recommend, but other than that, I think it was a great, quick, classic read. I'm glad I finally read it because it's been on my shelf for a while, and I know there's so many pop culture referencing it, so yeah. Next up is the smallest book that I read this month and a pre-order that I had, and this was Mysteries of Thorn Manor by Margaret Rogerson. This is a sequel novella to Sorcery of Thorns, and I loved it. It's a really small book. It's about 180 pages, and I put it next to the Bell Jar to show you how small it is. Like, it's smaller than a normal paperback, and very thin as well. But yeah, it's a sequel novella. It's focused mainly within Thorn Manor and about how Nathaniel and Elizabeth have to kind of adapt to living together after the events of Sorcery of Thorns. I really enjoyed it. It's focused very much on their relationship, but also the history of the manor and the history of Silas with the other members of Nathaniel's family. It's a fun and easy read. I would definitely recommend it if you're a fan of Margaret Rogerson, and I'd recommend it anyway just because it's really like fun. It's a magic house, there's magic people in it. At one point Elizabeth puts on like a suit of armour. It's all very amazing and fantasy orientated. Next up we had Spice Road. I loved Spice Road. It's an Arabian inspired fantasy. We follow our main character Amani, who finds out that her brother has not just left, but has left the hidden city of Kalia because he's gone to help the citizens of the wider world area that they're in, because actually their countries have been like colonized for the spice trade there, and he's going to help them kind of fight back. So Imani is going to collect her brother and bring him back into the hidden city of Qualia. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And then the whole story is about the tensions between what she's doing, her brother. Her sister also comes along, who is a great character. I love her, as she points out kind of the privilege that Imani and her family has, particularly because of their class status. And we also have Tahar, who is a beast seer, who can kind of control, I can't remember if it's an eagle or a different bird, but he can control the bird. They also all have magic when they drink tea, which is an amazing way to kind of include magic as something that isn't inherently part of them, but something that they have to earn and learn how to use. There's a lot of themes throughout the book. One of the main ones is the class and privilege that Amani has as part of her family, and also about how privilege in a society that's hidden away from the atrocities of the world, such as war, still have people less fortunate. And I thought that was really interesting to read. There's also a lot of action, there's a lot of fight scenes, there's a lot of kind of journeying across the sands, all very fun, a very kind of easy read as well, even though it's quite chunky. I think I read this in probably like a day or two. Really good book, would recommend it. Next up, I read The Stolen Heir by Holly Black, and anyone who knows me knows I love the Cruel Prince series, and I love Holly Black since I was younger, and I was reading Valiant and Tithe, so would definitely recommend this anyway. But The Stolen Heir is a sequel, spin-off, start of a series from the Cruel Prince series, which I can't remember what its name actually was, the Folk of the Air series. And it follows Oak from the original series, who is the little brother of Jude, and then we also have Ren, who we also meet in the original trilogy. So if you haven't read the original trilogy, I would recommend you probably need to read it to have a lot of context, but you probably also don't need to read it if you don't want to. The Stolen Heir does stand on its own, and it's all from Ren's point of view, so you don't need to know too much, because I don't think she knows everything, but she does know some things. The Stolen Heir was great. It was kind of an adventure story, as they have to get to one of the other places to save Oak's father, I believe it is, and also stop Ren's mother. And they kind of go through stages of like liking one another, not liking their enemies to friends quite quickly. The one thing I would say about it is, if you're going into it finding another book that reads like The Cruel Prince, it's not really the same. I feel like this is a much, I want to say, tamer version. It's not quite a slow burn romancy. It's definitely not kind of the same enemies to lovers aspect either. And also Jude and Cardan are mentioned, but they're not shown a lot in the book, so I wouldn't go into it expecting to see a lot of them and being disappointed. If you're looking for more of a story based in the world of the Folk of the Air series, I would recommend it. It's a really good read, quick read as well, even though it is quite a chunky book again, especially as a hardback, but yeah, would recommend. And then last but not least, I have A Ruinous Fate by Kaylee Smith, and this is an amazing book. I would recommend it out of all these books. This is the one you should definitely read. It's based on witches and kind of fate and throwing die, and probability and luck and all of that kind of good stuff. One of the things I love about this is there's like a world based on a lot of history and stuff. We don't get all the history in this book, but there are going to be more books in this series. However, there's so much magic in this world. We meet Valkyries, witches, siphons, mermaids, sylphs, and nymphs, which are air and water spirits, I believe. I think that's the right way around. And then we also get like a lot of like relationship building between all the characters, and a bit of a found family trope as well. So Calla, our main character, finds her family in her two roommates, who are also exiled witches like her. Well, actually one, Delphine, is a mermaid. And they become a found family who will do anything to protect one another, and they don't even pause in order to come with her on an adventure when they realise that she's in danger, which I loved. We also have Ezra and Gideon, who are prince witches of, and Ezra has a backstory and history with Calla as her ex-boyfriend, and Gideon is the older brother and crown prince, who has some secrets of his own. There is a little bit of a love triangle kind of hinted at, but it's more of a miscommunication rather than a die-hard love triangle. I'm hoping, and I don't really think it's going to happen more in the next book. I think Calla has very specifically said, like, there's nothing on my side to this love triangle, so I'm hoping it stays that way. but we will see how it goes. We know what YA is like. Yeah, it's just a really great book to read. There's a lot of kind of talk about magic in the book. I especially liked that they had to go on a quest to find ingredients for a spell, and then the spell happens, and then it all kind of goes off one after another, but you don't feel like you're kind of dragging along on this quest. A lot of interesting things happen. More characters come in who know the princes as well, so you get to see even more characters interacting with each other in different ways. I particularly enjoyed how all the different characters interact with each other in different ways based on their relationships. So Calla obviously treats Ezra and Gideon very differently because their history with Ezra is very different to their non-history with the Gideon, who she trusts pretty much straight away for many reasons. But then Delphine obviously is a lot more aggressive towards Ezra because she's trying to protect her friend from her ex-boyfriend. And Hannah has a traumatic past, which means that she's a lot nicer and more forgiving than some of the other characters. And it's all very well written and I loved it. So yeah, would recommend this out of any of these books for you to read as well. So yeah, these are all the books I read. I can't pick them all up because I don't have big enough hands, but these are all the books I read in January. I definitely recommend most of them for you to read, and I'm hoping to read just as many in February as well. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if there's any of these books that you also loved or didn't love, and I will hopefully have another video for you soon.